We are 8 or so weeks away from opening night against the Atlanta Hawks. It's never too early to think about it, right? Today on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is August 26th, 2026. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com, credentialed member of the Orlando Magic media since the 2012 season. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks joins the show. We'll talk about where the Orlando Magic and Atlanta Hawks sit in the bigger scheme of the Eastern Conference, why the Magic's quiet summer could lead to a louder season, and how the Hawks can catch lightning in a bottle. Once again, really fun conversation with Brad. Always love chatting with him. He knows his basketball really, really well. We talk about everything about the Hawks and the Magic and their summer and what to look forward to as we get ready for opening night, which is, again, a mere 8 weeks away. So let's get right to it with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. And this is Philip Rossman-Reich, the host of Locked On Magic, joined by my good friend Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. Always good to see you, Brad. Really looking forward to starting the season with the Hawks. Always a big game when Atlanta comes to Orlando. Their divisions, if they mean anything, are always big games. But Brad, let's dive right into it, because it does sort of feel like, in the bigger scheme of things, the Magic and the Hawks are kind of united in how forgotten they seem to be in the wider Eastern Conference picture. So I want to start from the thing that I'm most curious about. When you look back at last season, now that we've had some time, how do you kind of assess what Atlanta was able to accomplish in getting to the 6th seed? Sorry for not getting you guys to the 5 seed. That's our bad. Getting to the 6th seed, winning the Southeast Division, and kind of being like the story of the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting to see if it would be different had the end of the Knicks series gone a little differently. Like, not that they were going to win that series necessarily, but like the way they lost it was pretty gruesome by the end. But I think in general, if you zoom out, it was unexpected. I mean, the schedule was very easy. I did kind of foresee that and said as much on the show, but I don't think even I was thinking they were going to go 19-4 over that stretch late in the season. And they caught lightning in a bottle, to use the term on the side of the YouTube page here. But no, it's good. I think that they were not as good as that, but they also clearly found something. And as Hawks people organizationally are prone to telling me, it was like their 4th iteration of the team. Like, they had so much turmoil, and I know the Magic had injury stuff, but like it was at least the same roster for the most part. The Hawks had just a totally different roster. Like, you went from training camp being about Trae Young and Porzingis to both of them being gone midseason, and even before that, they weren't playing because of injury, and they had to kind of remake themselves on the fly. And then it was McCollum and all these things, and they found something that worked. And maybe it only works for a month, but it was enough to inspire some optimism for the future, I think, and just win some games. I mean, they won the division. I mean, we could poke fun at the divisions all day long, but the Hawks hang banners for divisions, so there'll be a new division banner up there when they open things up in a couple of months. So I don't know that you make a crazy amount about it, but it did help generally, like the perception of everything internally, externally, and all that, but also without having to trick themselves. Like, they don't suddenly believe like they're going to win the championship this year. Like, they're not getting too over their skis about it, which I think is nice.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I want to ask a little bit about what they did this offseason, because there's some really interesting moves in there, and I will note for all the Hawks fans listening, all 4 versions of that Hawks team beat the Magic last season. The Magic are not in a position to crow. I think I've crowed a little bit louder than I need to on Locked On Magic, while acknowledging the Hawks swept the season series. But you mentioned it, like the Hawks aren't too over their skis about it. Is the expectation, and I want to talk about the bigger Eastern Conference a little bit later on, but is the expectation to just repeat what they did last year, or how repeatable does, maybe again, not 19-4, but like how repeatable does it feel that group that finished the season is over an 82 game season?
I think it's interesting because the East is so much better and the league dynamics are so much different. I think we're all still trying to figure out what it's going to look like to have only a couple teams be like really bad and like also having no reason to try to lose at the end of the season. And I think that's going to calibrate the standings a little bit differently for everyone. Like a lot of the, our friends at FanDuel have a lot of the win totals are like pretty compressed in the Eastern Conference, and they're pretty smart about those things. I think the Hawks could be, and I think they are better than they were at the end of last season roster wise. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean they're going to win more games, which is difficult to explain to someone. And I get why. Like, people just think how many games you win is how good you are, which I understand that. But it's like every season's different. And I think the Hawks, realistically, they're not going to say this, but I think if they had a similar performance to last season as far as like overall record and 5-6 seed, like that would be pretty much like in the realm of what they would expect and project. Would they like to be better than that? Of course. And obviously that's the point off. The players and coaches, they're going to want to win every game. And that's to say that out loud, like they would hate that I said that. I'm saying the people that like are more removed.
I could already see Quinn Snyder like glaring at you for even suggesting. Yeah. suggesting.
First of all, he's never listened to a podcast in his entire life, so it's fine. No, I'm kidding. Hi, Quinn. No, it's one of those things where I think the Hawks could legitimately, and this could go for a lot of teams around the league, especially in the East. They could be better and not win more games.
Yeah,
and that's very reasonable. Like, do they have upside to win 50 plus? Like, sure, they could. Would I project that? No, I wouldn't. So it's like every season there's obviously a big error bar, but I think given what we don't know about like the way the league's going to look this next season, like I think people should be a little bit cautious about like what like the distribution is going to be from top to bottom.
Yeah, and I've told Magic fans this too. I don't think things could have gone worse for the Magic last season, and they still won 45 games. Like, they could win 45 games in 2026 and the 2027 season, and we'll all be like, yeah, that's a great season. They did really, really well that year. You've kind of mentioned like we don't really know what the league's going to look like. And again, we'll talk about the bigger picture Eastern Conference, but the one thing I find really interesting about the Hawks is just their roster construction just feels so different than so much of the league. And some of that is circumstance. They traded Trae Young, so you traded away a star, You got some like kind of young stars, but, and not that Jalen Johnson is an all-star and he's a very, very good player, but it feels like they're kind of a test case. And I'm curious what you think about this. They're kind of a test case for this league. The way the salary cap structure is, you don't necessarily need a quote unquote superstar to be great if you can spread your salary around to a bunch of really good players. It feels like Atlanta is kind of a test case for, can you win with the whole being greater, the sum being greater than each individual part? And again, not that Jalen Johnson wasn't an all-star last year, or Nickeil Alexander Walker isn't very good, or CJ McCollum even now is still a really good player. And I would argue Atlanta is probably as positioned as any team in the league to make that next big star trade if that's the direction they want to go. But they seem positioned or constructed in a way that's wholly unique to the rest of the league. And it's kind of testing what roster building is in the league right now. What's kind of your sense on how this team is built?
No, I think you're right. I think that the last part is key. Like I think could be overstated too, but they are primed to do the next thing. And they're pretty open about like, hey, not that we're waiting on Anthony Edwards. They're not saying that, but they're basically, they want to be constructed to be ready to pounce on the next guy who comes available. That could be kind of, if nothing else, maybe the 1A, 1B with Jalen Johnson. Maybe not better than Jalen Johnson. We'll find out then. But yeah, they have an interesting roster. And part of that maybe is market dynamics. Like, this is an ownership group that's never paid the tax, like ever, never done it. And doesn't mean they never will. But if you're a front office person, and Austin Saleh, the new president for the Hawks over the last 15 months or so, understands that. Like, he's not going to talk about that openly because it's his boss, but like he gets what they have not done. And also, the way the aprons are in the league now, which could be a cudgel, but it also matters. Like, you have to build a team a certain way. And they have really clean books. They have basically one contract, and it's Corey Kispert, that's underwater on the whole roster. And that's pretty good when you're trying to build a team in not a small market, but not a high spending market. So there's that. And like, they kind of pivoted smartly and maybe kind of naturally from, all right, we want to surround Trae Young with all these athletic two-way players, to, we don't have Trae Young anymore, but we're going to keep going with these athletic two-way players. And that has worked for them to at least a relative degree. Is there a cap on the ceiling of that kind of build? maybe, but we've also seen lightning in a bottle happen. Like the Pacers, obviously Tyrese Halliburton is better than, at least the version of him for 2 years ago is better. But that the whole idea of that was like him and a bunch of guys who were athletic and defensive minded around him, basically. Can the Hawks do a version of that? Like, yeah, maybe they can, but also I still think they probably need to make one more move. I think they probably agree, and probably won't be right now, but like they're building responsibly and essentially just being like, all right, we'll be ready for the next thing. And in the meantime, let's win some basketball games.
Yeah, and they're a really good team. Again, I think people are kind of forgetting about them in a way that I'm sure maybe frustrates you. Maybe you like being like completely under the radar again. Before we move on to kind of the Magic side, then what's your take on what they did this offseason? I thought grabbing Aaron Wiggins and Lou Dort were both really solid moves. I am a little curious how the rotation's going to work with Dyson Daniels and Lou Dort, both kind of playing the same position, having some of the same weaknesses. With CJ McCollum and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, that seems like there's a little bit of a rotation crunch coming with some really talented players, but that's a good problem to have. It really seems like they emphasize we're going to improve our defense this summer.
Yeah, I think what they've done is it makes total sense. Like they didn't want to make wholesale changes. They didn't want to push all their chips in, especially while a lot of teams in the East are pushing their chips in. But they added guys who fit culturally. They will defend. And I think they did it while not having to mortgage the future. And also, I mean, they traded Ricochet, who wasn't their pick, this front office, and that was their one send out. Everything else was like second round pick here, second round pick there, and they added guys who they think will fit. And that's essentially the long and short of it. Is it an exciting offseason? Maybe not in the overall world, and maybe we'll talk about that later. Is like maybe that's why the Hawks and Magic are not being talked about quite a bit. They didn't have huge splashes this summer, but everything made total sense to me.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating team. It's going to make for a fascinating opening night. We'll talk then a little bit about the Magic's quiet summer and the pressure that they're under, I think, right from the jump. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by friends over at Indeed. When workplace chaos hits and you need the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like skills, certifications, and location. So less time gets spent searching and more time gets spent finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. And the minute that I'll be talking to you today, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. It's the offseason. We're talking about all the offseason moves. And even if you don't have a ton of space, finding the right guy, that one right person, can completely change your team's outlook. That's why Indeed is the best place for you to find your free agents. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Philip Rossman-Reich of Locked On Magic here, back with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. Brad, I don't know how you feel, but the countdown is on to opening night between the Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks. And I think regardless of how anybody feels, opening night's always a fun night around the league, no matter what happens. I'll start asking you this question before we kind of turn the focus over to the Magic. Yeah. What are you looking for? And obviously we got a training camp. We got a long way to go, but what are you eyeing in that first game at the Kia Center coming up?
Yeah, I mean it's a long way, like you said, but I think it's funny. I thought about this today when we were getting ready to talk. The Magic might be the Hawks' biggest rival right now.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Like they don't like each other, which we could talk about if you want to. Like they clearly don't like each other.
There's some bad blood there. Goga's still around.
There's some bad blood. Yeah, the Goga injury thing from last year, like the
Isaac
Bane
injury
Onyeka,
the year before.
The Isaac injury, the Bane throwing the ball at Onyeka thing. Like there's lots of stuff.
Onyeka got him back too.
He did. But I find that part interesting to like what the opening night is fun always, for sure.
Yeah.
I almost wish it wasn't though. Like I almost wish it wasn't the Magic, because like I want to see those teams like more in a more normal setting facing off with each other. Because like anything happens. I mean, I know they will play preseason games and stuff, but like there's a little bit of variance. I feel like on opening night, like which team, what's your team going to look like? It's the first time they play together. But on the court, like I do want to see, like, of course the Hawks went 4-0 last year. I'm all joking aside, that happened.
It did.
Would I expect that to happen again? Probably not.
Except for the first game, they were all blowouts too.
Yeah, the last three were pretty lopsided. I don't expect that to happen as a continual thing moving forward. But like, I'll take the low hanging fruit and say it's a big year for Paolo Banchero. I know you're talking about that probably all the time on your podcast.
But
Paolo and Jalen Johnson are often compared to each other. They're similar positionally. I'll take that low hanging fruit and just say like watching those guys face off with each other is interesting to me. And then on the Hawk side, there's like the obvious, like how does Lou Dort fit in? Like all the new things. The Magic have, I think, less of that because they're kind of more running it back. But there's always little things that's like the first time you see something in a game that matters is prime overreaction territory, but also it's just interesting.
Yeah, and like there isn't a lot new with the Orlando Magic. They lost Mo Wagner, they lost Chet Howard, they added Nikola Vucevic. Like that's it. And Nikola Vucevic being your prize free agent at a minimum, it's not going to move the needle. I do think Vuce is a better player than Mo Wagner. I think they did get better just on that. A healthy Franz Wagner makes them better, but there is going to be a lot new for the Magic. And while we'll have the 4 preseason games to give us clues, they did hire a new coach. Like Sean Sweeney is a rookie coach. Nobody knows anything about the only people that know what he's going to be trying to do are his coaching staff. And maybe he's clued in some of the players and Jeff Weltman and like the Magic front office. They're like only people inside the Advent Health Training Center know what Sean Sweeney is planning for this team. And preseason, we'll probably see hints of what he's going to try and do, but it's preseason. You take everything with like several grains of salt. This game will be the first time they really kind of push things out, really kind of push what they're trying to do. Like, are they going to play the kind of pressure defense that San Antonio became known for last year under Sweeney? What reformations is he going to make to the offense? Obviously, we're all curious. Is Paolo going to come back? What's he going to look like coming back from not a really bad season? Like he didn't have the season that he needed to have. Franz will be back from his injury and his injury filled season. We're going to get to see this team, knock on wood, because there's a preseason to go before that, fully healthy, which the team was pretty good when that happened. That's kind of the big mystery. You mentioned like, this is a big season for Paolo, and it absolutely is. Like this season feels like a referendum on Paolo Banchero and whether he can be the guy that leads a team. And, you're right. He is compared a lot to Jalen Johnson, but you mentioned that, like the guy that I've kind of started quietly. And so I'll say it out loud here, and maybe it'll be traumatic for Hawks fans as much as it's going to be traumatic for Magic fans. I kind of think Paolo Banchero is falling into like the Trae Young trap, where he's statistically really good. Like defenses have to account for him. You can't just like ignore him. But the numbers, like the advanced numbers, the analytics, the on-off numbers, whatever it is, they don't like him for whatever reason. And it's not just that they don't like him. It's that when he's out of the lineup, they seem to play a little bit better. I'll keep, I guess, the focus. I'll keep the question to you then. Like, did you think, what did you make of sort of that phenomenon when Trae Young was on the Hawks, and like how do you get out of that as a player, or how did the Hawks try to get out of that? Obviously Trae took them to the conference finals. He had some success, but it feels like there's just a certain type of player that does all the eye candy stuff, but doesn't always affect winning the way you would hope.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously very different, which makes this a challenging thing. But it's that subclass of they're not superstars. Like they're paid that way, they're talked about that way. But like, this is more of a philosophical thing. But how many superstars are there at one time? Like,
sure,
is it 8? Is it 15? Like, whatever the number is, those guys are probably not in it. And even though they're the best player on the team, and that does inherently lead to some challenges. Again, they're different, but like, when you're one of the questions we'll say about Paolo was a similar question about Trae, is like, what happens when you are not the every down guy? Can you do the next thing? With Trae, it was this, obviously his defensive limitations are never changing. Like there's degrees of it, but it's always going to be there. With Paolo, it's like, is he going to be efficient enough as a scorer to make it all work? Like there's different big picture questions, but it's like once you get, so that's always there, but also it's like what's the next thing? Like how do you adjust? It's making players better. I will always maintain that Trae Young made players better on offense. Like there was pretty clear evidence of that. But also the team, like the on-off stuff wasn't always incredible. It wasn't bad either, but like he wasn't like driving clearly, like because the defense was worse. And there's a little bit of noise in there too. With Paolo, also there's the fit with Franz, which I know you talk about a million times. Like there's pros and cons to that. And and with Paolo, even I think they're similar in this way. Trae Young was not the number one overall pick in the draft like Paolo was, but Trae Young was an extremely, extremely famous college basketball player who was then traded for Luka Doncic. So he was a very high profile guy in a way that Paolo also was at Duke and number one. And like when you come in with that level of hype and you have big numbers, there's going to be a backlash on you if you're not winning at the highest level. It happened to Trae a little bit later because they did win fairly quickly. But then once they were back, that like within a year or two, it was like, what's wrong with this player? And now Paolo's getting that now off of last season. And I think some of that's earned. He wasn't very good last season, like you just talked about. But like, there's a little bit more noise with it if you kind of come out the gate flying, and then maybe even if you don't regress, if the perception is that you regressed, people start to chirp a little bit, and it's like the noise gets louder. And if you're the guy on a team that's not winning a ton of games, you get outsized blame oftentimes.
Yeah, and like even with like I think one of the things with Paolo too is like I think people still forget how young he is. Like he's 24. He's not turning. This is his year 24 season coming up, if I'm not mistaken. So he's still like he's on the big contract, and the contract comes with the expectations. You stop getting sort of the free pass. Like the line that I like to use now is the Magic have to stop being potential energy. They need to be kinetic energy. They need to, they're people are shocked when I say this. They're $2.5 million under the second apron. If they're not winning or if they're not pointing toward a championship team, they can't sit where they are. Like the Hawks are in a much different spot because, it just feels like the way the NBA world works is you attack and you retreat. You attack and you get up to the aprons. You have your 2-3 year run before you become too expensive, and then you retreat back below the tax and regroup. And it's just going to be a cycle for a lot of these teams of, are we attacking or are we retreating? Like the Hawks, they retreated a little bit. They've never paid the tax like you mentioned, but they retreated a little bit with Trae Young. They're ready to attack whenever that opportunity comes. The Magic are sort of going to be a team in retreat because they can't sustain this payroll and be a play-in team every year. And that's why there is just, it doesn't feel like this to the national world maybe, but to the Magic, there is immense pressure for them to win and deliver this season. And that goes to your stars first. Paolo, Banchero has to prove that he is the max guy, or they're going to hand the keys. They'll ship one of Paolo or Franz off and hand the keys to whoever's left. And honestly, I think that will be Paolo because of all the analytical reasons that everyone talks about with Franz. They have a Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black dilemma to make. Like, can you keep paying Jalen Suggs? It'll be $30 million this year. I think it's down to 29, 28 as his contract's front loaded, which was kind of a stroke of genius from Jeff Weltman. But Anthony Black is going to be demanding a contract that's going to be north of $20 million. Like you just can't pay everybody all the time, even if you draft well. And the Magic, I think people would probably say they drafted okay. They wouldn't say they drafted well, which is why they're kind of stuck in the middle, like so many other teams. But it had to be a quiet summer because the Magic wanted to see this group out there together. They didn't get a chance to see the vision of what they hoped for last year. I think the starting lineup played 170 something minutes. They were a plus 12 net rating in 170 minutes in 19 games. Just, it wasn't enough time to like get a real sense of how good this team can be. I'll ask to kind of close this segment of the pod up. Like, what are your, as a division rival, again, looking ahead to this opening night game, what is your perception of the Magic entering this season and what they could be?
I think it's such an obviously big season for the franchise because of what last year wasn't, and because not that they're not like all in like the Suns where they just have nothing left, but they already made a big move in the Bane trade. They gave up a lot for that, and they're spending at a level that, like, if you don't win, you won't keep spending at that level. That's basically what you just said, but it's 100% that's the case. If you look around the league, like, no one spends like that and then keeps it together if they're not winning. But they're still relatively young, which makes it interesting. Like, they have some questions of, like, you would think of kind of an older team, but they're still relatively young, which makes it an interesting kind of mix. I think for me, it's like, what does Sweeney bring? That's my biggest question. Is it's like, the roster is what it is. I think there is reason to be optimistic about that lineups that, if they're able to play together, which you just laid out the data of the best players, but like that gives you a shred of positivity there. But the rest of it's like, what can Sweeney unlock that the previous administration couldn't? And my thing is, like, I know you've talked about this, but kind of quietly, they just weren't that good defensively last year. And they just needed, I mean, that was their calling card for the previous 2 seasons. Like, they were elite defensively, and they just flat out weren't last year. And some of that's, I know, personnel driven and health driven, but like, there's no version of this Orlando Magic team that's going to be what they want it to be if they're 14th in defense. Like, they have to be better than that. They just have to be.
Yeah. And I think, like, as much as everyone wants to talk about the offense, Sean Sweeney's number one job is figure out how to make this defense elite again. And if the Magic's defense, and there's a lot of really good defenses out there. Like, Miami's going to be a really good defense. Toronto should be a really good defense. Oklahoma City's still around. San Antonio's still around. Minnesota still has Rudy Gobert. We'll see what they end up being. Detroit's still going to be really good. I'm forgetting someone who is also going to be really good. Atlanta should be much better defensively. I'm going to throw the bone there. Who am I forgetting that's going to be really good on defense?
Houston was good last year.
Houston was good. Phoenix was really good last year. There's like, I'm blanking on all the changes in the league. Like, Miami's going to be really good on defense. Like, there's going to be some really strong defensive teams next year. And, it might be a year where if you're in the top 10, you're still pretty darn good. But that's a great way to segue into what is this Eastern Conference? We've danced around it, talked a little bit about it. Let's discuss further where the Magic and the Hawks stand in a louder Eastern Conference. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. Philip Rossman-Reich of Locked On Magic, joined again by Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks, getting you ready for opening night, which is a good, 2.5 months away? We're 5 weeks.
I think.
We're 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Who's counting?
Me.
Yes, I am too. 5 weeks. 5 weeks to media day. Like, please. Yep. Someone asked me today, like, is opening night like the culture shock for you? And I'm just like, no, media day is, because I go from having no content to all the content, like too much content. Like, slow down, guys. Brad, I think one of, like, the big story last year was how open the Eastern Conference felt. And obviously, like, there were a lot of shocks in the Eastern Conference last year. Detroit climbing to the 1 seed, Boston being the 2 seed, Atlanta, Toronto getting to the 5 and tying for 5th. Again, apologies for not beating Boston. That was our bad. But there are a lot of surprises in the East, and it was super, super, super tight even then. Like one of the, like, silver linings that I tell people is, like, the Magic finished a game behind Atlanta and Toronto for 5th. Even as bad as things went last year, they were right there. It feels like not only the East get better, Kawhi Leonard will eventually join the Raptors. Jalen Brown, LeBron James going to the Sixers. Eventually the Pistons will re-sign Jalen Duren. That feels like that's going to happen. Cleveland will have a full year with James Harden. The Knicks won the championship. The Heat added Giannis. The Wizards get a full year of Trae Young and Anthony Davis. It feels like there are 12 teams that believe they're going to the playoffs this year in the Eastern Conference. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of these loud moves, and the Magic and the Hawks are obviously 2 teams that were kind of quiet. And it does feel like they are being overlooked a little bit. And especially Atlanta. Honestly, Atlanta is probably being overlooked. Like, I could scream and shout about Orlando all I want. Atlanta beat them 4 times. They were the 5 seed last year. I think people are really overlooking Atlanta as a potential threat to do things in the Eastern Conference. But what do you think about the way the East is sort of developed and where teams like the Magic and the Hawks, so I think are mostly grouped with each other in like preseason tiering, where they stand in this bigger picture of the East?
You said it, but there's three teams that are, I think, consensus not in the hunt, and it's in some order: Chicago, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, and basically everybody else is at least thinking they're going to be there. And I think I'm a little bit lower on the other division mates. Charlotte and Washington are probably in some order my 11 and 12, but like those teams can make the playoffs. They are talented teams. I think actually the top of the East is less certain than people are assigning at this point. Like, I think obviously the Knicks deserve a ton of credit and respect. They won the championship. As a regular season entity, they were not incredible last year. They were good. That was a good team, but they weren't some dominant entity until that run at the end of the season.
Until CJ McCollum woke him up. You can just say it.
Yeah, basically. But I mean, it was mostly Detroit, and Detroit's still good, but I don't think that anybody's like terrified of the Pistons. The Celtics were great last year, but like they had a lot of changes. If people didn't notice that's been in the news a little bit with Jalen Brown. So it's basically like I almost believe, I don't want to say any order between 1 and 10, but it's like, man, it is pretty jumbled. Even in Philadelphia, like as talented as they are, I'm going to be lower on them than everybody else seems to be, just because of the uncertainty factor and the injury factor and the depth factor. Like maybe they have a highest ceiling, but like, I don't know what that's going to look like. Is he going to play basketball? I don't know. Does he ever play basketball? The Hawks and the Magic for me are like kind of where they were last year. And it's going to sound like a cop-out, and I promise I don't mean it that way, but I think I would project them both to finish between 4 and 8 somewhere. And I know I'm honestly lower on Miami than everybody else seems to be.
I am too.
Their guard room doesn't make any sense to me. They don't have any guards. Like, you kind of have to have guards at some point.
Before they signed Klay Thompson, I was half joking with people. I thought the Magic had better shooting than the Heat before they signed Klay Thompson.
They probably did. And I mean, it's not all about, I know Giannis is going to have the ball in his hands, but like when Davion Mitchell is the only guard in your roster with like any level of experience, it's like, that's not ideal, I would say. So, I mean, you mentioned Toronto. We don't have to go through every team, but I really do think, like, if you look at FanDuel, like there's basically 10 or 11 teams between like 52 and 42.
Yeah.
And that's a very jumbled, it might seem like a big gap between those two numbers. That's really not a very big gap at all. That's very, very close together. Even at the top, the best teams, the Knicks, the Celtics, pick whichever teams you like, they could all win 48 games. Like, if the Knicks won 48 games this year, I would not be surprised. And that's and they're the favorite. So it's like, it's pretty smashed together in my mind.
Yeah. I get the feeling that like team 4 through 10 is going to be separated by like 2 games. And like last year, 5 to 10 was 3 games. Exactly.
6 teams, 3 games.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And like, it feels like the season for every single team. So it's not just our teams. It's every single team is going to come down to, Jalen Johnson missed 6 games, missed a week and a half. Paolo Banchero missed a week and a half. Franz Wagner missed a week and a half. Did you go 3-3 in those 6 games, or did you go 2-4? Did you go 1-5 in those games? And that's going to be the difference between we're fighting for the 4 seed at the end of the season to we're in the play-in. And it's just going to be literally, when do injuries hit you and can you survive them? And that's sort of what it's going to be like. And it's going to feel like even the 8 seed can beat the 1 seed. Like we saw this last year with the Magic. Like the Magic showed, we're healthy. And Detroit's a unique matchup. I agree. I don't think Detroit's very good. I'm not taking anything away from them. But they don't scare anybody. They added some shooting. I think they're a little bit more interesting. We'll see what Jalen Duren's like when he eventually signs with them. So I don't think he's going anywhere. But if he's like in a mood about the contract stuff, like suddenly that Detroit team looks very human. Like adding John Collins was nice, but Tobias Harris, I think, was really big for them in ways that people don't always recognize. And John Collins is a very different kind of player. It's still going to be a lot of Cade Cunningham doing things in Detroit. And so that's a much more susceptible team in the playoffs. And so I think you'll see, even if, the Hawks finish as a 6 seed, or the Magic or the 7 seed or the 6 seed or wherever they are, they can win their playoff series. It definitely feels like the playoffs are completely wide open. And like home court advantage means something, but you can lose that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, no, I think any of those teams could be in the conference finals. That doesn't mean they're going to be picked to do that. I think
don't pick them. Like don't
the
bet
teams
on
that we
them.
cover. Yeah, the teams that we cover like could make the conference finals, and that's not like me saying they're going to, or like saying that they're some like sleeping giant. I'm not saying that, but like the variance level this season in the East is pretty wide. When even the teams that everyone's more confident in, like I think the Knicks are going to be good, but like Philadelphia has some real downside risk. Like they just do.
If Embiid misses time, their backups are what? Adam Bona and Ariel Hukparty. Like,
yeah, I mean, in Detroit has some clear regression risk. Cleveland's got some regression risk. They're not. I mean, they don't. I know they added Watson, but like that's not a flawless team. Like, Boston's been really good in the regular season. So I think that almost shake it up in a hat and just tell them what's going to happen at the end of the season. We'll know. You know, that one thing that we should say. Usually, the first 20 games or so tells a lot. And we'll know a lot by Christmas.
It's something I think statistically, and I don't think that this will be the case this year. So throw this out the window. I think it's usually by Christmas, like 8 of the 10 teams are in like something like 6 of the before the play-in was like 6 of the 8 playoff teams are already in the field and like somewhat comfortably in the field. Usually by the first quarter and a half of the season, like you kind of know where you're going to stand and the group of teams you're going to be fighting with. But having said that, both the Magic and the Hawks last year changed their fortunes pretty dramatically. Like when Orlando went on that 7-game win streak that Atlanta snapped in March, Orlando was a game and a half behind Cleveland for 4th. You know, where was Atlanta when they finished that win streak? You know, they climbed, you know, it was like a joke, like they won all those games, but they were still eighth in the standings. They weren't climbing because Orlando and Miami were both winning a ton of games.
Winning every night. Yeah. I was a lot of pulling my hair out on the podcast. Like, well, they're still in 7th. It's one of this.
Yeah. So it's going to be like that all season. And, you know, having, you know, kind of bringing it all back full circle, starts opening night in Orlando, division game. Division tiebreakers matter. Like I know divisions don't mean anything, but like winning the Southeast Division could actually be a huge deal if there's 3 or 4 way ties for some of these tournaments. And again, sorry for not beating Boston. We warned the Celtics writers that could happen. They didn't believe us. But it's going to be a fascinating season from game 1. I think the Hawks are definitely a team people should be keeping an eye on. Hopefully people will be keeping an eye on the Magic as well, and we'll see where the chips fall. Brad, always great to chat with you. Hopefully I'll see you opening night. If not, see you in the conference finals, my friend.
I am planning to make the trip down to the Kia Center, so we will spend some time together in about 2 months in a basketball arena. I appreciate it.
Sounds like a plan. I want to thank Brad, as always, for hopping on the show. I know we are both very, very eager not only to fill our time here in these dead parts of August, but we're all looking forward to the start of the season. Training camp just about 5 weeks away. The beginning of the season about 8 weeks away. Magic open up against the Atlanta Hawks at Kia Center. Be sure to check out Locked On Hawks to get everything you need on the Atlanta Hawks until then. But always happy to have Brad on the show. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipR_OMD and on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. You can subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all of my standalone podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. Now that you're done listening to Locked On Magic, if you're on video, we're going to send you over the first ever 24/7 YouTube channel on the NBA. And on audio, check out Locked On NBA for your second listen. I know on Locked On NBA, they led off with me talking about the Magic and then proceeded not to talk about the Magic as a team that is very quietly being overlooked, but glad I can jumpstart some things over at Locked On NBA. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. On our next episode, we'll talk a little bit about rotations and what lineups actually work for the Orlando Magic. We'll get to that on our next episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.